Maybe the technical insurance stuff is a little bit more like rocket science, but as far as the actual role of the producer going out, opening opportunities, nurturing the relationship, and closing the business, that's not rocket science. It's not overly difficult for any of us to do. So if you're a $250,000 premium account and we're getting at least 25 grand in revenue off of you, I can afford to actually invest in risk management services at the agency level as opposed to passing those through to you. There's an old adage that says what gets measured gets done. And if you're not measuring anything, chances are you're probably not going to finish anything either. I think it's really important that you understand what your goal is, number one, and where you're at relative to that, and then begin to come up with a plan for you to be able to go back and get yourself on the right page for the rest of this year. If you're managing a group of producers, that you have measurable goals. And I think that if you're a producer, you need to make sure that your goal is measurable so that you have the ability to course correct in real time. Again, that's the beauty of what we do. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the guys from Montana are not going to get the same revenue on an account that I'm going to get in Florida. I can go get 5x at a bare minimum for a church account that they're going to get for the same church account in Billings. It's just not going to happen. I think sometimes when we cold call and we prospect, that if we don't get the appointment or we don't get the next meeting, that we consider that a loss. And I've never felt like that's a loss. In my opinion, as long as I'm getting data and everything, and continuing to build out a more robust profile of what that actual prospect looks like in the CRM or my spreadsheet, that's still a win for me. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. And we are going to do the next 3 episodes in a little different format. This past week, I did a killer call with the Killing Commercial community, and normally this stuff is private, but I really think this is a message that the masses need to hear. So I took our 1-hour call and divided it up into 3 20-minute episodes of what we're going to brand as Shoptalk. And I'm going to tell you, I think you're going to get a lot out of them. These episodes are going to cover what we need to do to prepare in Q4 of 2024 in getting ready to move into 2025. As we all know, there comes a lull in the summertime, and sometimes it's tough to get motivated again. So hopefully some of these tactics that we talk about are things you can use in your game to make you have the best Q4 yet. If you want to up your game, speaking of that, check out the new Power Producer Basecamp. It is a revamped version of the old Mastermind, and inside of it, we have a learning management center now. We have a private community with a news feed where you can interact with other agents from across the country. And we have 2 calls just like we always did, but they're now very focused. Instead of me doing 2 calls every other week on Tuesday and Wednesday, one for Killing Commercial and one for the Mastermind, we're going to do 1 call every week at the same time, same day, every week. And 1 call will be sales, 1 call will be marketing, 1 call will be for agency owners and sales leadership, and 1 call will be a town hall where you can come with any problems you have, and you can ask questions in an open forum if you're comfortable doing that. And it'll kind of free flow from my end in terms of what I talk about. But the Mastermind has promotional pricing for right now. It's only going to be good for a limited time, and it's got an amazing offer stack. Right now, if you sign up for that Mastermind and you buy the annual subscription, you'll get our ebook from Crushing Content on how to shoot video for digital content. You'll get our producer game plan, which is a protected piece of content from Killing Commercial for total cost of risk and the supplements that go with that. We'll also give you a 25% off coupon code to Policy T that'll save you 25% off your first order. And here's the big one. For everybody who does the annual subscription, you get into the September 25th all-day boot camp at absolutely no cost. That is a $397 value. So I normally don't advertise this stuff, but this is really exciting times, and we're getting a lot of momentum behind this base camp. And I encourage you to go to killingcommercial.com and check out Power Producer Base Camp at the top menu bar. Other than that, it's time to get rocking and rolling with session 1. Let's go. What I wanted to talk about today is getting ready for Q4. I mean, for all practical purposes, I realize the Q4 is October, November, and December, But we need to be preparing for that now before September gets here, because we really should be prospecting for October, November, and December. So that makes more sense for us to be, looking that far out in advance. And as you begin to reflect and think about where you're at for the current year, you don't want to be waiting until the last minute, because at that point it's too late. So I think it's really important that if you're a producer and you haven't compared where you're at to what your goal was for the year, or if you're a producer and you're in a position where you're on a draw, probably want to know where you're at relative to what your draw amount is, so that you're not going to owe money back at the end of the year. You need to pay attention to that. And if you haven't set an annual goal, while it's later than it should be, it's never too late to put a number up there that you want to strive to get. So, number one, you have to have that benchmark, whatever it is that you're measuring against, and you want to make sure that you're on trend to hit that. If you're not, how do you fix it? Well, we're going to get into that over the course of the webinar, but the short answer is call more, prospect more, knock on more doors. If you don't want to increase volume, then increase the sizes of the accounts if you can in your geography, so that you don't have to write as many new ones to get to that number. But that sort of goes back to what I've talked about plenty of times, of where you want to have an account or a pipeline full of your ideal prospects, and then maybe have those 3 to 5 big rocks that are the ones that if you hit that, that's like the mother load for the year. And you're not going to hit one of those every year, but you may hit one every second or third year. And when you do, you go back in, you replace it, and you keep prospecting, because those take a lot longer time for you to be able to close relative to when you initially introduce yourself to the relationship. So I think it's really important that you understand what your goal is, number one, and where you're at relative to that, and then begin to come up with a plan for you to be able to go back and get yourself on the right page for the rest of this year. Sorry, I got people coming in left and right. I warned you guys. I knew it was coming. But I think even more importantly, when you look at this stuff and you set your goals, I don't know how many people have ever heard the acronym SMART before, but SMART is a good acronym when you're goal setting, because it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So number one, it's got to be very specific, like every single year. And if you've gone through the producer business planning module as part of the business planning piece, I ask you up front, what do you want to make? You should know what that number is. Randy Schwantz does it a little bit differently in his wedge training. He asks you how much you want to have when you retire, and he starts reverse engineering from that. I don't think we need to be that macro in our view, because if we do this part right, we will be fine, with the long-term planning stuff. But if you're not setting an actual goal every year, it makes it really, really tough for you to reverse engineer to the behaviors you need to meet in order to hit it. And let's be honest, what we do, maybe the technical insurance stuff is a little bit more like rocket science, but as far as the actual role of the producer, going out, opening opportunities, nurturing the relationship, and closing the business, that's not rocket science. It's not overly difficult for any of us to do, but we have to know the volume at which we do it. So if you're not specific and say, here's how much I want to make, how do you do any of the rest of it? The other piece of it is you got to know what your commission percents and your splits are. I always put a disclaimer on this. I'm going to tell you what my splits are at the agency. It's not necessarily that I'm looking for anybody to tell me I'm too high or I'm too low. I also don't want you to think that about the firm you're in if yours are different than mine. My splits there was no thought process behind it. I've worked for 40% new and 25 renewal ever since I've been in the industry. I didn't think about changing it when I launched Florida Risk 8 years ago, so I just left it there. But that's our split. So I know that if I want to make $200,000 this year, and my split on new business is 40%, and this is my first year in business, I got to write $500,000 in revenue to make $200,000. if you came to me with that business plan, you better have a whole lot of documentation showing me that you have the ability to prospect accounts at a reasonable level that are going to get you to that 500,000 in revenue. That might be very specific, but it's also not very realistic. So I would say that's the R is irrelevant. That's not even relevant at that point because you're not going to hit that number. Now, if you're in an area like Florida or California and you show me a pipeline of accounts that are all 100,000 or more in revenue, and you say, no, David, I think I'm going to close one every quarter and maybe one extra one just to get to that 500, you have a leg to stand on in arguing with me at that point, and I'll buy into it. But I would say for the overwhelming majority of the people on this call, you're not looking at that. I can tell you I'm not, but there's always going to be that one person who is. So be relevant in what the opportunities are based on where you're at. We've got people from literally all over the country in here right now. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the guys that are, from Montana are not going to get the same revenue on an account that I'm going to get in Florida. I can go get 5X at a bare minimum for a church account that they're going to get for the same church account in Billings. It's just not going to happen. And so you need to take that in mind when you hear me talk too, because there is a translation factor. That's why I try not too often to really get revenue specific, but talk more about the bands of middle market being from that 25,000 to the over 250. If you were on the last call, we actually shared some of that with you just to rehash it, but we tiered our accounts, and it's one of the rare times that you're going to hear me talk about premium, but it was easier for us to tier in the agency based on premium than it was revenue. And so, we're doing platinum, gold, silver, and bronze. Bronze is 25,000 or less in total account premium. Bronze is 25 to 100, or I'm sorry, silver is 25 to 100, gold is 100 to 250, and platinum is anything 250,000 in premium or above in total account revenue. What does that mean? That really goes back to what is the level of servicing that we're going to give these people when we bring them into the family, right? So if you're a $250,000 premium account and we're getting at least 25 grand in revenue off of you, I can afford to actually invest in risk management services at the agency level as opposed to passing those through to you. The other thing that we can do is I can have my producers come to me and say, hey, David, this account's 75,000. It's not that far off from being silver or from being gold. I really think it's growing at a rate that it's going to be platinum in the next 2 years. And I would like for you to make an exception and have us be able to deliver the platinum service model, even though this account right now is currently rated as silver. Perfect. That's not a problem. Good business case. I'm happy to do that. Or if it's an account that's maybe not that aggressively growing, but they need help and they need more than what we're going to be able to fund at the agency level, I can sell them that platinum service model and give them those resources outside of the insurance relationship and monetize it so that we're still being made whole on our investment on our end. And I'm not putting a bunch of money into an account that may or may not pan out to me, because the one thing we know is the lower you get in premium, there's a direct correlation to the likelihood that account is a more transactional buyer, and the retention is much harder for you to achieve. So, you have to use your head when you're thinking through some of this stuff. And I was talking with Corey Hagan earlier, and he asked me, how many times have you been burnt? And I said, honestly, over 8 years, like twice. And I should have seen both of them coming. So if you're good when you're out at the point of sale and you're pre-qualifying people and you can see where they're at and how much they're willing to buy into what you're talking about through body language or even questions they're asking, it's usually a pretty safe gamble that if I'm going to invest in a baseline risk assessment at the agency level before I actually have revenue coming in, I've got a pretty good feeling that this is going to be a long-term relationship based on what we've built to that point. But measurable, is also important. And I think, one of the things I think a lot of I didn't realize that we're like not even going SMART at this point. We've gone S and we've gone R, but I'm going to go back. We'll fill in the blanks. But from a measurable standpoint, I think this is really important too. And I don't know why an agency wouldn't measure progress or a producer wouldn't measure progress. Like everything we have has a number tied to it. I think that a lot of the times where things fall down is in our leadership as agency principals, because we don't communicate that. And I've had several calls with agency principals over the course of this week and last week where they were giving me different examples of things that weren't necessarily working the way they wanted to in their agency. Some of it had to do with production. Some of it had to do with service staff. And my question was the same both times. What standard did you set that you can measure their performance against? And in every case, that standard was never set. And if it was never shared. So I think it's really important that if you're managing a group of producers, that you have measurable goals. And I think that if you're a producer, you need to make sure that your goal is measurable so that you have the ability to course correct in real time. Again, that's the beauty of what we do. If we're not on track, we can fix that, and maybe it's that we're not calling on the right ideal prospect. Maybe it's that we're not doing enough marketing drops. Maybe we're doing too many marketing drops and not augmenting enough with phone calls because we can get through more that way. And, we need to set ourselves up to where we can make those decisions relatively quickly so that we all end the year where we want to be. We talked a little bit about the achievable. I think the relevant tied into that where I mentioned the $500,000 book. So I'm not going to belabor that point. But then you also got to put a deadline on it. At the end of the day, there's an old adage that says what gets measured gets done. And if you're not measuring anything, chances are you're probably not going to finish anything either. You're going to end up looking like, how my brain looks on a day where I try and focus on one task as opposed to multitasking to cater to my ADHD. And so, you've got to have a time goal on it and say, okay, line in the sand, this is what I'm going to do. I put out a new edition of the revenue roadmap on LinkedIn today, and it was specific to how to manage your time for work-life balance. And I think that's the other thing that's important because the fourth quarter comes with a lot of distractions. You're distracted as a producer or an agency principal from your family because you're so focused on trying to close the year out strong and get ready for January 1 renewals. But on the flip side of that, you can also be distracted by your family because you're going through the holidays and you want to spend time with them. And if you don't have your plan in place, you can fall off really, really quickly because you're choosing family over work. Now, this is not an argument about what's more important. I think everybody who knows anything about me knows family is number one beyond a shadow of a doubt for me, but I can't be the best leader of my household if I'm not being the best producer and earner in the workplace too. And so you have to have a healthy balance of the two. And if you have if you struggle with blocking your calendar, doing time blocking and things like that, I would encourage you to go read that article that I published on LinkedIn because it was, it was something that plagued me for a long time. And I think a lot of producers can learn from that. Ciara just put in chat that we weren't having much success with Leo and it was user error on how we were filtering it. So they met with Scott from Leo and tweaked our filters and cleaned it up and got way better quality leads for quarter 4, Q1 of 2025. Was that in response to somebody else?
No, I was just saying, yeah, just to your point of like reevaluating the stuff. We
Yep.
were working on things that were just not big enough. Like the calls that my appointment setter were making, it was still just not quality enough. And so we knew it was us that we were filtering. Maybe we were over filtering it, trying to be maybe too specific. And so Scott was great. After Key West, I reached out to him and let him know, and he walked us through and showed us how to like make the list really big and then filter it down and save each version. And so we're going after electricians specifically here in the Tri-County, and I even wanted them to be like, I want to know who has Brown and Brown, and out of that list, I was able to get 94 electricians in the Tri-County, over 10 employees that have Brown and Brown.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
That's perfect. And I mean, I think that's the thing too, not to get too far sidetracked from this, but I think sometimes when we cold call and we prospect, that if we don't get the appointment or we don't get the next meeting, that we consider that a loss. And I've never felt like that's a loss. In my opinion, I feel like as long as I'm getting data and everything, and continuing to build out a more robust profile of what that actual prospect looks like in the CRM or my spreadsheet, that's still a win for me. So, Ciara would know this because she's in Florida, but I mean, one of the things we do have the ability here to target specific agencies. And so, even if you weren't using Leo, Ciara, and if you wanted to cross-check Leo to see how accurate it's being compared to the raw data, we have the ability in Florida to go to the Department of Financial Services website and we can pull every active workers' comp policy by county, by expiration month, and export that to an Excel spreadsheet. And if I wanted to follow her strategy, I could export that, put filters at the top, and I could filter by the agency name and the governing class code. So I could get everybody who's with Brown and Brown, and then everybody whose governing class code was the electrician's code. And now I have a list of everybody that I already know is buying workers' comp that has an active policy. And I know that the dates are right because they're the ones that are reported to the state directly from the carriers. So there's a lot of tools that you can use in your state. If you're having a hard time with that, I know that I talked about this with Steven and the crew at Glidewell last week when we had our call, but I've talked to a couple people this week about it already. Many of your states just tell you that the comp is active, that it's got, it gives you the policy number and it gives you the carrier that's on it. And then it says, yes, this is active today. Doesn't ever give you the X date. This is where NCCI is your best friend. I'm not going to walk through it again on this call because I've actually got a blog post with screenshots coming out next week, and you'll be able to see it and follow the directions there. But this is why, even if you're not doing this as a producer, you can have a virtual professional or even a high school kid that comes in after school to work part-time, have them go into NCCI and go in and get the X date, because that is the rating effective date on the mod for 99% of the policies. Unless one was canceled midterm and moved, it's always going to be the rating effective date. And then have them subscribe to the automatic updates for permanent updates so that you're getting notified when that mod changes. You just killed two birds with one stone, and it gives you, again, just a little bit better window to prospect in. And I was on a call with a couple guys from another agency in Killing Commercial right before this, and we were going through their strategy of prospecting, and I walked through step by step. This is how you do this. This is why you want to do it this way. And it's like, it's so much easier when you call with news as opposed to calling trying to find out information, right? And that's why I've always said that if you get the notifications on the experience mod and you can see that the mod is out and it's above 1, you want to make sure you know what the mod was from the year before. But it really honestly doesn't even matter, because if you just called up and said, hey, I just want to let you know I've been following your company for a while, wanted to make sure you saw your new experience mod. Have you seen it? If they say yes, my immediate fallback is, wow, you're quick, because it literally just came out yesterday. Now they probably got confused because they thought it was the one that was on their policy, not the one for the coming year, and you can actually carry the conversation on from that point. But use NCCI as much as you can for that information, because that's a database that, as long as you're in an NCCI state, you have access to it, and you should at least be able to get the X date and subscribe to those notifications. If you haven't done that for stuff going into fourth quarter, do it like yesterday, because this is a great way for you to have a call list every single day when you come to work. Now, if you're an agency that has multiple producers and you're the person who's responsible for managing those producers, then you want to make sure that you're equitably distributing those leads, and you want to make sure that email is going to an unbiased, email address so that you can filter those out. We do that in a round robin way inside a HubSpot with inbound leads, and it's kind of a manual process when it's stuff coming from NCCI, but it's also relatively easy because most of them are already assigned to a producer in HubSpot. So when I go in and look at what the company is, I can see who the producer is that's already, claimed that lead for us. And I don't want to get into the semantics, but they have to have actually had conversations and been in, some sort of regular communication for them to be able to claim it. They can't just go to the database, download it, and say, this is mine, and then never do anything with it. And then I've got a producer who has the ability to get in and can't because the lead's claimed by somebody else. You need to have criteria in your agency for what you're going to allow somebody to claim. Otherwise, I'm sure everybody on this call is absolutely perfect, and we would never have infighting between producers. But hypothetically speaking, if we were going to have it, that's where you're going to have it. Producers tend to fight over leads and accounts, and it always cracks me up because you'll get somebody who goes into an account that somebody else has in their database, and it's never intentional. In my case, it hasn't been anyhow. But that person who had it assigned to them gets all up in arms, and you go back and look at the notes, and they've never had any calls out. They've never done a marketing drop. They just found it in a list and claimed it. You can't have that. You have to be equitable in how you're doing that stuff.